What would you do if a single sentence tried to strip you of your dignity at 30,000 feet? What if the ticket you purchased, the seat you earned, and the identity you carried were all questioned not because of proof, but because of prejudice? On a quiet flight from New York to San Francisco, Dr. Maya Carter, a black CEO and aerospace pioneer, boarded first class with nothing more than her boarding pass and her calm presence. But one flight attendant's smirk, one dismissive remark, set off a chain reaction that turned an airplane cabin into a courtroom, a classroom, and a mirror for everyone on board. What unfolded was more than conflict. It was a revelation about silence, bias, and the unstoppable strength of quiet power. A story that didn't explode in shouting, but reshaped itself in dignity, patience, and undeniable truth. So the question is, when silence surrounds you, will you choose to be complicit, or will you choose to be courageous? If you believe stories like this need to be told, hit that like button, share this video, and don't forget to subscribe. Because what you're about to witness will change the way you see justice in the skies forever. It started with a sentence. Just 6 words, dropped into the air like a careless spill, but sharp enough to cut. You people always try something. Doctor. Maya Carter froze for half a second, boarding pass still in her hand. She stood in the sleek, carpeted aisle of Sky Continental Airlines' first-class cabin, blazer crisp, suitcase tucked neatly at her side. Her smile was polite, professional, almost reflexive. But that sentence had already landed. It wasn't casual, and it wouldn't be forgotten. The words came from Rachel Morgan, the flight attendant stationed at the boarding door. Her voice pitched loud enough for the passenger in row 1 to hear. She tilted her head as if amused, lips pressed into a smile too thin to be kind. Maya's eyes didn't flinch. She simply extended the boarding pass again, steady and deliberate, the way a surgeon might hold an instrument. The ticket read what it had always read. Seat 2A, first class, purchased directly. But Rachel wasn't looking at tickets. She was looking at skin. She pinched the pass between her fingers, holding it up to the overhead light as if the ink itself were counterfeit. Then, with a faint scoff, she shoved it back into Maya's chest. "You don't look like a doctor," she added, voice lower now, a smirk tugging at one corner of her mouth. "You look like you belong in coach." The words hit harder than turbulence, and in that moment, the cabin turned, heads tilted, brows raised, whispers fluttered through the air like paper scraps in a draft. Someone in row 3 unlocked their phone and angled the screen just enough to catch the exchange. Another leaned toward his neighbor, muttering with the kind of confidence that grows in shadows. The man, in 1C business casual, silver watch, conference badge still clipped to his bag, lifted his phone and started recording. His thumb tapped quickly. Fraud in first class. Watch this. Maya Carter did not argue. She did not beg. She didn't even correct. Instead, she inhaled deeply, her chest rising and falling with the steadiness of someone who had lived through moments like this before. Moments where the world demanded she prove herself, where silence could feel like surrender but also like strategy. She thought of her grandmother's voice, a refrain etched into memory. Don't give them the reaction they want. Make them trip over their own assumptions. So Maya smiled faintly, not a smile of agreement, but of certainty. And then she stepped into 2A, setting her leather case beneath the seat with surgical precision. Rachel lingered in the aisle, still wearing that thin smile, still convinced she had the story figured out. She adjusted her scarf, tapped her phone, and muttered to a colleague, "This one's going to be trouble." But trouble wasn't sitting in 2A. Trouble was what happened when assumptions met receipts. As the rest of first class filled, the air itself seemed to tighten. Each gesture, each whisper felt amplified. Maya's presence had become a question mark in the room, the kind of question that unsettles people not because of what's said, but because of what isn't. A young woman in row 3, Chloe Bennett, book in hand, pretended to read her Kindle. Her eyes stayed locked on the page, but her hands trembled just slightly with each swipe. She had heard Rachel's words. She had seen the shove, but she kept her head down, safer that way. Across the aisle, James Cooper, mid-50s, broad-shouldered, retired firefighter, sat with arms crossed. He watched the exchange with the kind of quiet that carries both restraint and readiness. He knew what he saw, and he didn't like it. Luis Alvarez, a 22-year-old aerospace engineering student, sat behind Maya. His jaw tightened. He was still calculating, would his voice matter if he spoke up, or would it vanish into the noise? The whispers grew. She probably wandered up here with a basic ticket. Watch, she'll start crying discrimination any minute. Guarantee that bag isn't real. Rachel's smirk widened. She pulled her phone out discreetly, angled the camera, and hit record. Her online persona, Sky Rach, lived for moments like this. She didn't have to name Maya. The camera could do the work. Her caption came quick and titled, "Passenger Refusing Seat Assignment." 18 viewers, then 72, then 100 and climbing. Maya heard none of it. Or rather, she chose not to hear. She pulled her phone from her blazer pocket, typed 3 short messages, one to her assistant, one to her legal team, one to a contact labeled "Board Chair Personal," and slid it back into her coat. Preparation, not panic. She folded her hands on her lap, legs crossed neatly, posture calm. Her breathing matched the hum of the air system above. Because real power doesn't announce itself. It waits. It prepares. It lets the room underestimate you just long enough for the truth to walk in on its own. But that didn't stop the storm from building. Phones tilted higher, fingers typed faster. Judgments flew harder than the jet would ever climb. And all the while, Maya sat still, not defeated, not pleading, just present. It was the kind of presence that unsettles people more than shouting ever could. Because silence, when chosen carefully, is never empty. It's loaded. It's waiting. And for Rachel Morgan and everyone watching, it was about to become unbearable. The engines hadn't even started yet. But the tension in the cabin was already humming like static before a storm. Passengers in first class shifted in their seats, trying not to look too obvious as their eyes darted toward 2A. Phones glowed faintly, screens angled just enough to capture, to record, to judge, doctor. Maya Carter sat perfectly still. Her posture was the kind you'd see in a boardroom before a multi-billion-dollar merger. Shoulders relaxed, hands folded, gaze steady. To the casual eye, she looked calm. To anyone who looked closer, she looked unshakable. But inside, her mind moved like a machine. She thought about what had just happened. The push of the boarding pass against her chest. The smirk. The sentence that hung in the air like a stain. "You people always try something." The words were nothing new. She had heard them her entire life, dressed in different clothes, spoken with different tones, but always carrying the same message. You don't belong here. As a child, it was a teacher who questioned how she got into advanced math. As a teenager, it was a store clerk shadowing her down the aisles. As a young professional, it was a colleague who told her she was surprisingly articulate. Each time, the words pricked, but she learned not to bleed where everyone could see. She learned to hold her silence like a shield. That shield was up now. Rachel Morgan stood at the front of the cabin, whispering to another flight attendant, phone still in her hand. The blue glow of the screen reflected off her cheek as her live stream ticked upward. 98 viewers, 150, 200. Some folks think money buys them anything, Rachel said quietly into the camera, her voice sliding between mockery and amusement. She tilted her head slightly toward Maya without saying her name. Seat 2A. Coach passenger trying to upgrade herself. Unreal. The comments started rolling in. Typical. She's about to pull the race card. Kick her off the flight. Maya didn't look. She didn't need to. She knew exactly how bias sounded, whether whispered in a classroom, typed in a comment box, or spoken out loud with a smirk. Her phone buzzed softly in her pocket. 3 replies to the messages she had already sent. She didn't check them yet. Timing was everything. Behind her. Luis Alvarez fiddled with the zipper of his backpack, his leg bouncing nervously. He had seen it all, the dismissive words, the shove, the deliberate humiliation. His heart thumped. His throat tightened. He wanted to say something. But his mind flooded with questions. Would they listen to me or dismiss me too? Would I be seen as just another kid, another loud voice, another problem? He swallowed the urge. Silence felt safer. Across the aisle. James Cooper leaned back in his seat, arms folded, jaw tight. He was no stranger to confrontation. 30 years as a firefighter had thrown him into flames, both literal and metaphorical. But this gnawed at him in a different way. Watching a black woman, dignified and poised, treated like a trespasser in a seat she had bought, it was fire of another kind. His hand twitched on the armrest. He wanted to speak. But he also knew that once his voice entered the fray, there would be no turning back. 2 rows up, Chloe Bennett tried to bury herself in her Kindle. The words on the page blurred. She had heard the comment, seen the boarding pass shoved, but fear anchored her. She was young, traveling alone, and the idea of standing up in a cabin full of strangers paralyzed her. If I speak, I'll get dragged into it. If I stay quiet, at least I'm safe. Safe, but complicit. The silence in first class wasn't quiet anymore. It was loud. It pressed against the walls, heavy with judgment, thick with unspoken thoughts. Maya could feel it wrapping around her like turbulence. Every glance was a weight, every whisper a trial. And yet she remained still, because she knew something no one else in that cabin understood. Yet, silence, when chosen, is not weakness. It is preparation. It is the pause before a precise strike. She adjusted her blazer sleeve, her movement small but deliberate. The cameras caught it, of course, phones tilted, screen zoomed. A ripple moved through the cabin, passengers hungry for her reaction, but she gave them nothing. Instead, her thoughts traveled back to her grandmother's kitchen in Atlanta, where the scent of collard greens simmering on the stove mixed with lessons whispered like prayers. They'll test you, Maya. They'll poke and prod, waiting for you to break, but never give them the satisfaction. Don't fight on their terms. Make them come to you. Make them trip on their own arrogance. Her grandmother's voice was a balm now, and a warning. Rachel's laughter cut through the air like a bell. She was still live, still narrating, still feeding the beast of bias that never needed proof to thrive. "Security's on the way," she told the camera, hand on her hip. "Let's see how this one plays out." Maya felt her pulse quicken, not in fear but in calculation. Let her call security. Let her dig deeper. The higher she builds her case on assumptions, the harder it will collapse when the truth drops. The man in 1C chuckled softly, his phone still recording. "She doesn't look like a CEO," he whispered to his seatmate, unaware that his mic was hot, that his words were already streaming live to hundreds of strangers who would later drag him for every syllable. Maya closed her eyes briefly, inhaling the recycled cabin air, steadying her breath. Power, she reminded herself, doesn't panic. Power prepares. Her phone buzzed again. She opened her eyes, lips pressing into the faintest smile. Timing. Always timing. James Cooper finally leaned forward, his deep voice carrying low but firm. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, addressing Rachel at the front. "I saw her boarding pass. It said 2A, first class, no question." Heads turned, phones lifted higher. Rachel didn't even face him. "Sir, please remain seated," she snapped. "We don't need interference." Interference. Maya almost let out a laugh. That's what truth always gets called when it threatens a lie. Evelyn Shaw, the elderly woman in 4D, shook her head at her husband. "Why is this even a discussion?" Robert muttered loudly. "Look at her. She doesn't belong here." Evelyn nudged him, not in disagreement, but in warning. Cameras were everywhere. Luis Alvarez lowered his gaze, shame burning in his chest. He wanted to shout, he wanted to stand, but the fear of being dismissed, of being painted as another loud Latino kid, glued him to the seat. His silence tasted bitter. The silence spread. It wasn't passive anymore. It was electric. It buzzed against the walls, charged the air, and set the stage. The cabin was no longer a cabin. It was a courtroom, and every passenger, willingly or not, had taken a side. Maya Carter remained still, not because she was powerless, but because she knew the less she moved, the more the room revealed itself. The hum of boots on the jet bridge broke the moment. Heavy, deliberate. 2 officers in Navy uniforms stepped on board, radios crackling, vests pressing against the narrow aisle. Their presence shifted the air immediately. Passengers leaned forward. Others shrank back. Rachel straightened, lowering her phone but keeping it in hand. "Officers," she said quickly, gesturing at Maya. Passenger refusing to move to her assigned seat. Non-compliant. Non-compliant. Another word that had been used against people like Maya for centuries. A label that made bias sound like procedure. Officer Mark Ellis took the lead, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the cabin. His gaze landed on Maya, sizing her up not as a customer, but as a problem to be solved. "Ma'am," he said firmly, stepping closer, "I'm going to need you to step off the plane so we can sort this out." The silence cracked. Phones lifted higher. Gasps rippled. 1,000 judgments clicked into digital memory. Maya opened her eyes fully, calm as ever, and prepared to speak. Her voice, when it came, was even quiet, precise. "I'm in the seat I paid for," she said. 2A, first class. And in that moment, the silence wasn't just heavy, it was dangerous, because silence that carries truth is never empty. It's explosive. The request from Officer Mark Ellis hung in the air like a final verdict. "I'm going to need you to step off the plane." Every head turned, every phone tilted upward, every breath seemed to pause. To most passengers, it already looked like a foregone conclusion. Security had spoken. Authority had entered the room. And authority, in most people's minds, never sided with someone like Maya Carter. Rachel Morgan folded her arms across her chest, her lips tugging into the kind of grin that feeds on validation. She had won, or at least she thought she had. Her phone, still live in her palm, caught her at an angle that made her look composed, in control. Comments filled the screen, a stream of faceless agreement cheering her on. About time. Rules are rules. She's about to get dragged out. Maya didn't move. Her fingers rested lightly on the armrest, her posture a statue of calm. But inside, her thoughts spun in a careful rhythm. She knew how easily these moments spiraled. She knew how authority, when paired with bias, could turn stillness into threat. She raised her chin slightly, her voice steady but soft. "I am seated in the place I paid for," she repeated. "I am not moving." Gasps fluttered like birds in the cabin. Some passengers smirked, others shook their heads. A businessman 2 rows back leaned to his neighbor, muttering, "This is it. She's going to get arrested. Watch." His phone recorded every word. The whispers grew louder, more emboldened. Each one fed the next. It was like wildfire, burning quickly through the rows. "She doesn't even look like she belongs in first class. Coach folks always trying to sneak in. Bet she found that boarding pass in the trash." Rachel lifted her chin, her voice sharp. "Officers, she's non-compliant. I've told you. She's in the wrong seat." Mark Ellis didn't hesitate. He had been in situations like this before, though none quite like this. His instincts told him to de-escalate, but his training, his culture, the subtle biases he didn't even name, all told him the same thing: authority first, compliance second, truth maybe later. "Ma'am," he said again, firmer this time, "step off the aircraft." Silence pressed harder. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade. And then, from across the aisle, James Cooper spoke again. His voice was deeper this time, sharper. "I told you. I saw her boarding pass. It said 2A, first class, clear as day." Rachel snapped her head toward him. "Sir, please don't interfere." But interference, it seemed, was the only antidote to lies. In row 3, Chloe Bennett's heart pounded. Her Kindle lay forgotten in her lap, the screen dimming into sleep mode. She had been silent this whole time, hoping to fade into invisibility, but her conscience gnawed at her. She had seen Rachel shove the boarding pass. She had heard the words, the smug tone, the venom hidden behind the smile. Her palms grew damp. She wanted to speak. She wanted to say, "I saw it too." But fear wrapped around her throat. Fear of Rachel turning on her. Fear of becoming the next viral clip. Fear of being noticed at all. So she stayed quiet. Luis Alvarez, meanwhile, tapped his knee, his mind racing. He thought of his classes back at MIT. The lectures about bias in engineering systems, the importance of precision, and yet here he was, watching a human system collapse because people preferred assumption over verification. He wanted to raise his voice, but he was still calculating the cost. And through it all, Maya Carter stayed still. Her silence wasn't empty, it was strategic. Each second she sat unmoved. The room unraveled further. Each assumption layered itself higher, waiting to collapse. She could feel it, the way a seasoned chess player feels the weight of an opponent's overconfident move. Rachel's live stream ticked upward 400, then 600, then nearly 1,000 viewers. The comments poured in faster now. Kick her out already? She's making a scene. Entitlement at its finest. But in row 1, the man still recording for his own feed. His caption read differently. Flight fraud in real time. Let's see how this plays out. The story was already spreading. Narratives were being written in real time, shaped by bias and ignorance, and no one realized how fragile they were. Maya leaned back slightly, her gaze steady on the officer. "Do you have proof?" she asked, her voice low but cutting, "that this is not my seat?" Ellis blinked. He hadn't expected the question. Rachel jumped in before he could answer. "We don't need proof. We have procedure. She doesn't belong here." The audacity of it hung in the air. James Cooper shook his head slowly, his voice laced with disbelief. "You didn't even check the system. You didn't scan the ticket. You just decided." Rachel's cheeks flushed red. She tightened her grip on the phone, angling it lower as if that could shield her from being caught in her own performance. Maya exhaled quietly. She could feel the weight of every eye, every camera, but instead of fear, it gave her clarity. She thought again of her grandmother, the lessons passed down like armor. They will build their case on sand. Let them. When the tide comes, the truth will wash it all away. Maya's phone buzzed once more in her pocket. She ignored it again. Timing. Always timing. Chloe's conscience roared louder than her fear now. Her throat tightened. Her lips parted. She almost spoke. Almost. But the words died before they reached air. She looked at Maya, and in that moment, she realized something that would haunt her. Later silence may keep you safe, but it never keeps you innocent. Rachel cleared her throat, trying to sound authoritative. "Captain Hughes needs to be informed," she said to the officers. "We need her removed." And just like that, another shift rippled through the cabin. Captain. The word carried weight, the kind of weight that could tip the scale. For the first time, Maya allowed herself a faint smile. She knew the tide was turning, slowly, imperceptibly to most, but turning all the same, because bias could shout, bias could live stream, bias could whisper in every corner, but truth only needed one opening, and that opening was coming. The cabin was a theater now. Every passenger, both actor and audience. Each phone a stage light. Each whisper a line in a script no one had rehearsed. Doctor. Maya Carter sat at the center of it all. Her silence a gravity that pulled eyes toward her and forced people to decide whether they would look away or confront what they had seen. Luis Alvarez kept his eyes on the back of Maya's seat. His chest rose and fell too quickly, his hands restless on his lap. He thought of his professors at MIT, the conversations about systemic bias in engineering, how blind spots built into systems caused disasters. This is the same thing, he realized, a human blind spot, coded into people, playing out in real time. He wanted to say something, to raise his voice the way he would in a classroom debate, but fear strangled him. He was young, Latino, traveling on a discounted ticket. Who would listen to him? He would be dismissed as overreacting, as trying to make noise where there wasn't any. His jaw tightened. His silence felt heavy, like carrying a weight he hadn't agreed to lift. 2 rows over. James Cooper's patience thinned. He had kept quiet out of respect, waiting to see if reason would surface on its own. But the more Rachel Morgan talked, the more his chest burned. 30 years as a firefighter had trained him to recognize danger, and what he saw here wasn't a fire of flames, but of prejudice. It spread fast, fueled by assumption and arrogance, and if left unchecked, it would consume dignity itself. He leaned forward again, his voice deliberate. You need to check her ticket in the system, not just take someone's word. You've got scanners, you've got records, use them. Rachel snapped back without turning her head. Sir, I said remain seated. James's eyes narrowed. He muttered just loud enough for his row to hear. I've seen arrogance before. It always ends the same. Chloe Bennett flinched at his tone. Her Kindle had slipped to the floor, forgotten. She folded her arms tightly across her chest, trying to disappear into the leather of her seat. But she couldn't block out the sound of her own conscience. She remembered her first job interview, when the manager had joked, "You don't look like a software engineer, but we'll see." She had laughed nervously then, said nothing, and gotten the job. It hadn't felt like her fight. Now, watching Maya endure, she felt that same sick twist in her stomach, except this time, silence didn't feel like safety, it felt like betrayal. Her lips parted, her lungs filled, but the words froze again. She hated herself for it. At the back of the cabin, Evelyn Shaw adjusted the pearls at her neck, whispering to her husband, "This is what happens when people think they can buy their way anywhere." Robert nodded, his voice low but cutting. "She doesn't belong here. You can tell. Their whispers weren't whispers, they were daggers, sharp enough to wound even without being aimed directly, and yet they spoke with the comfort of people who had never been held accountable, who assumed their judgment carried more weight than truth. Maya heard them all. Every word, every mutter, every assumption clothed as certainty. She didn't react, not yet. She simply adjusted the cuff of her blazer and rested her hands back on the armrest. Inside, though, her mind wrestled. Part of her wanted to rise, to confront, to remind them that her company supplied parts to half the aircraft in Sky Continental's fleet. Another part urged patience, the voice of her grandmother whispering steady counsel, let them talk. Let them pile their arrogance high enough for it to topple over itself. Her pulse quickened, but her expression remained still, unreadable. Rachel's phone buzzed in her palm. She glanced at the stream over 1,000 viewers now. Comments scrolled faster than she could read. She's stalling. Security better drag her out. Why do they always play the victim? Rachel's lips curled into satisfaction. She was winning, at least online. The validation of strangers was enough to fuel her arrogance, enough to make her believe she was untouchable. Maya could sense it. She could almost see the false confidence swelling in Rachel like a balloon ready to burst. Then James Cooper leaned forward once more. His voice carried the weight of someone who had faced flames and refused to back down. "You're humiliating a woman who bought her ticket fair and square," he said. "I saw it. Others saw it. The only fraud here is the way you're treating her." Phones tilted instantly toward him. His voice, deep and unwavering, cut through the cabin like a siren. Rachel turned, her face flushing, her authority suddenly threatened. "Sir, I'll have you removed if you don't stay silent." She snapped. James didn't move. He stared back, unblinking. The silence that followed wasn't just tense, it was seismic. A crack had appeared in Rachel's performance. The audience in the cabin felt it. The thousands online watching her stream sensed it too. Luis Alvarez's chest tightened. If James could speak, maybe he could too. His lips parted, but again, hesitation clamped down. He cursed himself silently, wondering if courage was something he only possessed in textbooks and essays. Maya inhaled softly, her breath slow and measured. She recognized the moment for what it was. The tide was beginning to shift, not fully, not yet, but enough to tilt the balance. Rachel's smirk faltered. She lowered her phone just slightly, her voice losing some of its edge. She was still posturing, but her confidence wasn't as seamless as before. The eyes of the cabin weren't only on Maya, now they were on her. Evelyn Shaw whispered again, this time with less certainty. Maybe it's not what we think. Her husband scoffed. Don't backpedal. We know what we saw. But Evelyn's eyes lingered on Maya, her expression flickering with something that looked suspiciously like doubt. Chloe bent down to pick up her Kindle, her hands trembling. She pressed it to her chest, staring straight ahead. She thought about all the times she had stayed silent in her life, and how each time it felt easier to convince herself it wasn't her fight. But this moment clung to her differently. Her conscience screamed, but still, no words came. The officers shifted uneasily. Mark Ellis adjusted his radio, glancing toward the cockpit. His instinct told him to call the captain, to let someone higher up decide, but Rachel's voice rang sharp in his ear again. She's not supposed to be here. Captain Hughes will back me up. The mention of the captain's name rippled through the cabin. Passengers straightened in their seats. The authority above authority. The one voice that could decide whether this ended as humiliation or vindication. Maya tilted her head, a faint smile ghosting across her lips. She had been waiting for that word. Captain. Her silence deepened, her resolve sharpened. She knew the next act was about to begin, and when it did, silence would no longer be the heaviest sound in the room. It would be truth. The aisle cleared instinctively as Officer Mark Ellis shifted closer, his radio buzzing at his side. His stance carried the weight of finality, the kind that passengers recognize from 1,000 movies where authority storms in and resolves conflict with a single order. Yet this time, nothing was resolved. Rachel Morgan stood tall, chin lifted, phone lowered just enough to seem professional but not enough to hide the fact that she was still streaming. Her words came sharp and quick, each one slicing through the cabin air. Captain Hughes needs to be notified. This passenger refuses to comply. Maya Carter met her eyes, her face calm, her tone even. I am seated in the place I paid for. There is no refusal. There is no disruption, only assumption. Some passengers scoffed, others murmured under their breath. The man in 1C whispered to his phone. She's going to be dragged out. Just watch. His live stream numbers ticked higher. The cabin door at the front opened with a deliberate click. Every phone rose higher. Every conversation hushed. Authority had arrived. Captain Daniel Hughes stepped forward into the aisle. His presence carried 30 years of experience, broad shoulders beneath a Navy uniform, silver at his temples, calm in his step. He didn't rush, he didn't frown. He simply looked, scanning the room the way a veteran scans a storm radar searching for the real center of danger. Rachel straightened her scarf, voice crisp. Captain, we have a passenger refusing to move from coach to first class. She's been non-compliant despite repeated requests. The captain's gaze shifted to Maya, His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes studied her longer than expected. He extended a hand politely. "May I see your boarding pass?" Ma'am Maya reached into her blazer pocket with steady grace. No rush, no flinch. She placed the boarding pass in his hand, along with her ID. Her business card rested neatly atop them, not as arrogance but as clarity. Captain Hughes examined them. Once, then again, his brow furrowed not in confusion, but recognition, the name, the company. He had seen it before. Orion Aero Systems, one of Sky Continental's major suppliers, a company that his own airline relied on for leasing agreements and safety innovations. The murmur in the cabin shifted like a tide. Phones caught the pause in his expression, the hesitation that spoke louder than words. Rachel stepped forward quickly. "Anyone can print a business card," she said sharply, trying to plug the crack before it widened. "She doesn't look like a CEO. She doesn't belong here." Maya tilted her head just slightly, her eyes narrowing with precision. Her voice, soft but firm, cut through every whisper. "And yet, here I sit. The only one who doesn't belong here is the lie you've been telling." The silence that followed was thunderous. Even the hum of the engines seemed to pause. Luis Alvarez felt his chest tighten. He wanted to cheer, to clap, to stand, but his body stayed frozen. Still, hope flickered inside him. The tide was turning. James Cooper leaned back, nodding once to himself. He recognized that tone, that composure, the same kind of steady authority he had used in firehouses when chaos threatened to overwhelm. He whispered under his breath, "That's how you fight. Not loud, just true." Chloe Bennett bit her lip so hard it hurt. She had seen the truth laid bare, undeniable, and yet she still couldn't find her voice. Shame pressed against her ribs, making her throat ache. Say something, her mind screamed, say it now, but the words refused to come. Captain Hughes handed back the documents, his tone lower now. "Everything appears to be in order." He glanced at the officers. "We'll verify in the system, of course, but for now, Dr. Carter is within her rights." Rachel's face blanched. "Captain, with all due respect, enough." His voice, though calm, carried steel. The kind of steel that silences cabins. Respect is not optional. "Miss Morgan," phones captured every second. Streams filled with comments flipping in real time. "Wait, did he just call her doctor? Is she really the CEO? Oh, this airline is about to regret this." Maya folded her hands gently in her lap, her presence unshaken. Inside, though, she allowed herself one slow exhale. She had known this moment would come. The system always tripped on its own arrogance eventually, but she also knew it wasn't over. Not yet. Rachel clutched her phone tighter, scrolling quickly through her live feed. The comments had turned against her, the validation draining like water through cracked glass. "This is your boss's boss. She owns the planes you fly. You just ended your career on live video." Her pulse quickened. For the first time since the exchange began, doubt pressed against her ribs. She looked back at Maya, not with arrogance now, but with the unease of someone realizing they had misjudged the battlefield. Maya met her gaze evenly. No smirk, no triumph, just calm clarity. "Not knowing," she said softly, "is not an excuse." Rachel swallowed hard, her throat dry. She lowered her phone at last. Mark Ellis shifted uncomfortably, caught between his earlier stance and the unfolding truth. His training had not prepared him for a moment like this, a moment where authority was on the wrong side of evidence. The captain turned back to Maya, his voice respectful now. "We'll verify in the system just to confirm. But I want to assure you, Dr. Carter, your presence here is acknowledged." Maya nodded once. Acknowledgement is a beginning, but not nearly enough. Her tone carried weight, a weight that lingered in the air long after the words had faded. Evelyn Shaw twisted her pearls nervously, whispering to her husband, "Maybe we were wrong." Robert grunted, unwilling to concede, but even he shifted uncomfortably, his certainty no longer ironclad. Chloe Bennett closed her eyes for a moment, shame burning hot. She knew what she had witnessed. She knew her silence had made her complicit, and yet she still said nothing. The courtroom atmosphere of the cabin pulsed with tension. For some, the verdict had shifted. For others, denial still clung like armor. But for everyone, the moment was undeniable. The narrative Rachel Morgan had spun was unraveling, thread by thread, under the weight of truth. And Maya Carter, silent and steady, remained at the center not as a victim, but as a force the room could no longer ignore. The tension inside the cabin was a living thing now. It crawled across the leather seats, clung to the overhead bins, and seeped into every whispered exchange. For a moment, no one moved, no one breathed too loudly. The captain's voice still echoed faintly in the space. "Everything appears to be in order." But appears was not enough for Rachel Morgan. "Captain," she said, her voice sharp but edged with unease, "you can't just take her word for it. We can't risk a disruptive passenger. Procedure exists for a reason." Captain Hughes raised an eyebrow. His calm eyes shifted back to Maya. "Would you mind, Dr. Carter, if we verify your purchase directly with our system?" Maya's lips curved into a faint smile. "Of course, Captain. Verification is always wise." Her voice wasn't defensive. It wasn't pleading. It was precise. The kind of tone that belonged to someone accustomed to boardrooms. Someone who had been second-guessed before and had learned to let proof do the talking. She reached into her leather case with deliberate movements. Every eye in the cabin tracked her hand. Phones tilted closer, zooming in, eager for evidence or failure. First, she placed a black metal card on the tray table. The platinum edges gleamed faintly under the cabin lights. The kind of card you don't just own, you earn. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Someone muttered, "That's an Amex Centurion." Rachel's smirk wavered, but she forced her voice steady. "Anyone can get a fancy card these days." Maya ignored the remark. Her movements were patient, almost ceremonial. Next came her business card, sleek, matte black, with embossed silver lettering that caught the light just enough to shine. Dr. Maya Carter, founder and CEO, Orion Aerosystems. The name landed like a stone in still water. Ripples moved instantly through the cabin. Passengers shifted, phones quivered in hands, comments online exploded. "Oh my God. Orion, they supply half the industry. She's not just a passenger, she's a boss. Rachel just messed with the wrong one." Captain Hughes read the card twice. His jaw tightened, not in doubt but in recognition. He had seen the name before. He had signed contracts that bore that very company logo. Rachel laughed nervously, though no one joined her. "Anyone can print a business card. Doesn't prove anything." Maya finally turned her gaze on her, calm and sharp at once. "And anyone can embarrass themselves. Some just choose to do it publicly." The line cut through the air with surgical precision. Phones caught it, streams replayed it, hashtags were already forming. James Cooper let out a low hum of satisfaction. "There it is," he whispered, almost like a prayer. Luis Alvarez's heart raced. He recognized the company name instantly. Orion Aero Systems was legendary in aerospace circles. He had written papers citing their innovations, and here sat its founder, enduring humiliation while a flight attendant tried to discredit her existence. His shame deepened. Why didn't I speak sooner? Chloe Bennett's eyes widened. She had seen plenty of people posture, flash wealth, pretend power. But Maya wasn't posturing. She wasn't pretending. She was simply presenting proof. Proof that had been ignored, doubted, dismissed because of skin and stereotype. Chloe's throat tightened with guilt. Rachel opened her mouth again, but her words faltered. The stream in her palm betrayed her. Comments poured in, flipping faster than she could process. "Delete this while you can. She literally owns your fleet. Girl, you're done." She lowered the phone, her hands trembling slightly. Officer Mark Ellis stepped back, suddenly less certain of his authority. He cleared his throat. "Captain, maybe we should check with corporate before making a final call." Hughes nodded, his voice calm but firm. "Yes, we'll confirm. But from where I stand, Doctor, Carter has every right to be here." The murmur in the cabin swelled again. Some passengers who had stayed quiet were now leaning forward, their eyes different, no longer dismissive, now tinged with respect. Others shifted uncomfortably, realizing how quickly their assumptions had turned to ash. Maya sat back in her seat, folding her hands neatly once more. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't begged. She had simply placed evidence on the table and let it rearrange the room, but she wasn't finished. She reached again into her case, this time producing another card. Smaller, simpler, no glossy finish, just plain white with bold, clean type. Maya Carter, co-founder and managing partner, Vanguard Capital Partners. The effect was immediate. Captain Hughes blinked, recognition flashing again. Luis Alvarez gasped audibly, his engineering student brain making the connection before most. Vanguard was one of the largest equity firms in the transportation sector. Rachel's face drained of color. Maya's tone stayed level. "Not only do I design and lease the aircraft you fly, Captain, I also hold a stake in the company that employs you, indirectly. Yes, but substantively. Phones captured the moment. Comments ignited. She owns part of the airline. Rachel just insulted her boss's boss. This isn't just awkward, it's catastrophic." James Cooper chuckled under his breath, shaking his head. Quiet power, always the loudest in the end. Chloe Bennett felt tears sting her eyes. Shame burned hotter now, not just for herself, but for the world that made this necessary for a black woman to pull out receipts just to be believed. Evelyn Shaw fidgeted with her pearls again, her earlier certainty dissolving. She whispered to her husband, "We judged too quickly." Robert bristled but said nothing. Even he couldn't deny the evidence spread across the tray table. Rachel finally broke, her voice weak, almost pleading. "I didn't know." Maya's eyes locked onto hers. Her words were soft, but they cut sharper than any shout. Not knowing is not an excuse, not verifying, not pausing, not questioning the bias behind your assumptions. That is negligence. Miss Morgan, and negligence has consequences. The silence afterward was unbearable. It wasn't just silence anymore, it was reckoning. The captain adjusted his cap, clearing his throat. "Dr. Carter, I deeply regret this. I'll be contacting regional leadership immediately." Maya gave a small nod. "That would be wise. My legal team will also be in touch. The footage alone speaks volumes." Rachel clutched her phone tighter, her face pale, her body stiff. The career she had built, the image she had curated online, all of it now dangled by a thread, and she knew it. Maya leaned back once more, her voice steady as stone. "Power doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be prepared." The words landed across the cabin like a gavel. For some, they stung with shame. For others, they sparked admiration. But for everyone, they made one truth: undeniable receipts don't lie. The cabin air felt different now, heavier but also sharper, as if every molecule carried the electricity of revelation. Phones stayed lifted, eyes locked on the woman in 2A who had quietly shifted the gravity of the room without raising her voice. "Doctor." Maya Carter rested her hands on the armrests, calm as ever. Her proof laid neatly on the tray before her. She hadn't raised her tone, hadn't made a scene, but she had made something far more powerful. She had made the entire room look at themselves. Rachel Morgan stood stiff at the front, her scarf slightly askew, her cheeks flushed. Her phone still rested in her hand. But now she was no longer smiling for the live stream. She scrolled with frantic fingers, watching the comments she could no longer control. "Delete it. You're finished. Power doesn't always look like you expect." Her pulse quickened, panic pressing against her ribs. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She had been sure the crowd would back her, that authority would take her word without question. That had always been enough before. But now, the tide had turned, and she was drowning in it. Captain Daniel Hughes cleared his throat. His hand lingered on the documents he had already returned to Maya, as though the weight of them still burned in his palm. He had known her name, known the company, but seeing the cards and hearing her voice had forced him to confront something deeper than just procedure. He straightened. His voice carried calm authority. "Dr. Carter, everything you've presented checks out. You are exactly where you are supposed to be." The murmurs swelled into a wave. Some passengers nodded quietly. Others looked away in shame. A few shifted uncomfortably, trying to hide their earlier smirks. James Cooper leaned forward again, his voice steady. "Captain, with respect, she should never have been questioned like this in the first place. Not with that kind of arrogance." The words hit hard because they were true. Phones caught them, amplified them, sent them racing through streams that had once mocked but were now beginning to repent. Rachel's lips trembled. "I didn't know who she was," she muttered, almost to herself. Maya's eyes lifted, catching hers with precision. "You didn't need to know who I was. You only needed to respect what was in front of you." The cabin exhaled as though those words had punched the air from its lungs. Luis Alvarez gripped his backpack straps, shame rolling through him. He thought of all the times he had been dismissed, all the times he had swallowed his voice. Watching Maya, he saw both the courage he longed for and the cost of silence. She's carrying what the rest of us are too afraid to say. He realized. Chloe Bennett pressed her Kindle to her chest, guilt pressing harder with each passing second. She thought of her own silence, of how she had chosen comfort over truth. She whispered softly, so low no one heard, "I'm sorry." But Maya heard the silence louder than the whisper. Silence always had a volume. Captain Hughes shifted toward Rachel now, His voice was firm, no longer just measured authority, but disappointment. "Miss Morgan, your actions have placed this airline in a very precarious position. Live streaming passengers, making assumptions instead of verifying protocol, this is unacceptable." Rachel's eyes flickered with desperation. "I was trying to protect the cabin. I thought you thought wrong." He cut in. Her chest tightened. She swallowed, but the lump in her throat didn't move. She turned her eyes back toward Maya, a quiet plea in her gaze. But Maya didn't soften. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her voice low, almost intimate, but sharp enough to pierce through every layer of defense. This was never about protecting the cabin. This was about protecting a lie, and the lie is collapsing now. The room held its breath. Rachel felt heat rise to her cheeks. She lowered her phone completely, shutting down the stream. But it was far too late. The internet never forgets. Comments were already spilling into other feeds, videos being clipped, hashtags spreading, #QuietPower, #OrionGate, #FlyWithRespect. The story had escaped the cabin. It was alive, beyond anyone's control. James Cooper shook his head, almost in awe. She didn't need to raise her voice once. He murmured. Luis finally found his courage, though his voice shook. "She's teaching us more right now than any textbook ever could." His words weren't loud, but they carried weight because they came from truth. Maya didn't look at him, but she heard him. And for the first time, she allowed herself a small nod of acknowledgement. Evelyn Shaw turned to her husband. Her eyes, once sharp with judgment, now shimmered with unease. "Robert," she whispered, "we were wrong." Robert's jaw clenched. His pride fought against the evidence, but even he couldn't deny what was plain. He grunted softly, staring down at his folded hands. Rachel, trembling now, tried one last time to salvage authority. "I didn't know." Maya's gaze cut her off. "You didn't need to know who I am," she repeated slowly. "You needed to know who you are. And today, the world has seen that clearly." Rachel's breath hitched. The words sliced deeper than any reprimand from her captain. Because Maya hadn't just called out her mistake, she had called out her character. Captain Hughes exhaled, turning to the officers still standing uneasily nearby. "This passenger's cleared. Doctor, Carter will remain in her seat. There is no further issue." Mark Ellis shifted his stance, the weight of embarrassment visible in his posture. He gave a curt nod, stepping back toward the galley. His silence admitted what his words never could. He had been wrong. The passengers felt the shift too. The trial was ending, and the verdict was clear. Maya Carter belonged exactly where she was. But the story wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Maya leaned back in her seat again, folding her hands neatly once more. Her presence filled the cabin. Not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it through patience, through proof, through unshakable composure. Quiet power had revealed itself, and once seen, it could not be unseen. Phones clicked off one by one, but the damage or the reckoning was already done. Videos were spreading, narratives flipping, truths being dissected in real time across feeds and forums. The world outside this cabin was beginning to take notice. And inside the cabin, every passenger sat with the weight of what they had witnessed. Some with guilt, some with shame, some with newfound respect, but none with indifference. Maya had made sure of that. The silence in the cabin didn't last. It never does. Silence, once broken by truth, tends to echo louder than the lie that came before it. Maya Carter sat in 2A, hands folded, her gaze steady. She had done little more than sit still, speak calmly, and produce proof. Yet the effect was seismic. Rachel Morgan lingered at the front, her body stiff, her phone lowered but still glowing in her hand. She hadn't deleted the stream, she couldn't. It had already been mirrored, clipped, shared. Too many eyes had seen it. Too many fingers had tapped record. She was no longer in control of the narrative, and the narrative was brutal. On Twitter, hashtags multiplied, #Quiet Power, #Orion Gate, #Fly With Respect, clips of Maya placing her card on a tray table spread like wildfire. Aviation forums dissected every frame. That's Dr. Carter, she's literally responsible for half of Sky Continental's fleet. Business blogs spun instant think pieces about race, bias, and corporate vulnerability. The cabin had no idea yet how large the storm outside had grown, but they could feel it pressing in through the thin walls of the aircraft. James Cooper leaned forward, his deep voice carrying again. You see how fast assumptions crumbled 10 minutes ago. She was a problem. Now she's the foundation this whole airline rests on. Several passengers shifted in their seats, guilt prickling their skin. Luis Alvarez finally found the courage to lift his voice. His words trembled, but they came out anyway. She shouldn't have had to prove herself at all. That's the real problem. The weight of his statement landed like a stone. Heads turned toward him, some nodding, others avoiding his eyes. Luis swallowed hard, but inside, something cracked open. He had finally spoken, and the silence he had carried for too long loosened its grip. Chloe Bennett pressed her Kindle tighter to her chest. The shame inside her had grown unbearable. She had watched. She had heard. She had known the truth from the beginning. Yet she had stayed silent, protecting her own comfort. Her conscience wouldn't let her rest. Her voice broke the air, soft but trembling. I heard what the flight attendant said to you. I saw her shove your pass back at you, and I said nothing. The cabin stilled, Chloe's cheeks flushed, her voice shaken as she pushed through. I stayed quiet because I didn't want to get involved, but that was cowardice, and I'm sorry. Maya turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting Chloe's. For the first time, Maya's expression softened. Acknowledging silence is the first step to breaking it, she said gently. The words landed with unexpected warmth. Chloe exhaled shakily, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. From row 4. Evelyn Shaw shifted uncomfortably. She had been one of the loudest whispers earlier, nudging her husband with smug certainty. Now, her pearls felt like a noose around her neck. She took her husband's hand, her voice unsteady. We judged her. I judged her. I let a pattern play out like it was normal. Her husband, Robert, grunted, staring down at the floor. His pride battled with reality, but even he could no longer deny the evidence. His silence, for once, was not arrogance but concession. Rachel's breathing quickened. She had lost the cabin, lost the crowd online, lost control of the very stage she had built for herself. She tried again, her voice weak. I didn't mean Maya's words cut her off. Calm and steady. Intentions don't erase impact, and ignorance doesn't excuse harm. The line rippled through the cabin. Even the officers, who had been standing awkwardly near the galley, lowered their eyes. Phones still captured everything. Maria, a passenger 2 rows back, who had quietly started streaming after Rachel shut hers down, whispered into her mic. This isn't just a story about one passenger. This is a lesson about systems, assumptions, and the cost of silence. The comments on her live filled instantly. Powerful. Teaching moment. This needs to go viral. And it was. Already, news outlets were clipping the video, headlines flashing across timelines. Flight attendant humiliates Black CEO, truth, backfires live. From bias to backfire, Sky Continental faces PR meltdown. Doctor, Maya Carter, the woman who sat still and changed everything. Inside the cabin, the reckoning continued. James Cooper turned to Chloe, his voice softer now. Owning it matters. A lot of folks never do. Louise nodded. She's teaching us in real time about what it means to carry dignity even when the world tries to strip it away. Maya let the silence breathe again, the kind of silence that forces reflection. Then she spoke, her voice low but carrying to every corner. This is not just about me. This is about what you all chose to see, about the story you believed before any proof, about the ease with which you decided who belonged and who didn't. Her gaze swept the cabin, steady and unwavering. Change doesn't begin when someone is caught. Change begins when people decide to see what they have ignored. The cabin seemed to exhale together, the weight of her words pressing into each passenger differently. For some, it was shame. For others, clarity. For all, it was undeniable. Rachel lowered her eyes, her voice breaking. I've destroyed everything. Maya shook her head slowly. No, you revealed it. The destruction was already there. You simply chose to show it to the world. Rachel's lips quivered. She turned her face away. No longer the confident attendant, but a woman stripped of certainty, exposed in the harsh light of her own actions. Captain Hughes stood tall, his voice clipped but respectful. Doctor, Carter, I assure you, corporate leadership is already being contacted. This incident will not go unanswered. Maya gave a single nod. See that it isn't just answered. See that it is corrected. Her tone wasn't vengeful. It was architectural. She wasn't interested in revenge. She was interested in rebuilding. Outside, the storm on social media raged harder. Clips were trending worldwide. Students shared Luisa's words. Advocates quoted Maya's line, "Intentions don't erase impact." Business leaders reposted with commentary about systemic bias. Inside the cabin, the passengers sat in silence, no longer heavy with judgment, but with reflection. Because now, no one could pretend they hadn't seen, and no one could pretend they hadn't been part of it. The hum of the engines returned as the aircraft prepared for departure. But the true noise was inside the cabin. Not the chatter of passengers, not even the buzz of phones still recording, but the thrum of realization. Everyone had seen what had happened. Everyone knew there was no going back. Doctor. Maya Carter adjusted the sleeve of her blazer. Calm as ever. She had been humiliated, doubted, and recorded for the world's amusement. Now the truth was undeniable. But she wasn't interested in personal vindication. Vindication without change was just a headline. She leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but commanding. Captain Hughes, I'm requesting 3 immediate actions. The cabin stilled again, heads tilting subtly, ears straining. 1, she began, her tone precise, termination of any employee who live-streamed this incident without passenger consent. Privacy is not optional. Rachel Morgan's knuckles whitened on her phone. She tried to swallow, but her throat was dry. Her career was already slipping through her fingers, but now it felt as though Maya was chiseling the last piece of stone from the cliff she clung to. 2. Maya continued, her gaze steady. Suspension of all crew involved until a formal investigation is completed. Not for revenge, for accountability. The words landed heavier than turbulence. Some passengers nodded silently. Others shifted uncomfortably. James Cooper muttered, "That's the least they can do." And 3. Maya finished. A formal apology from corporate leadership. Not a template, not a vague acknowledgement, but a clear statement naming the bias that created this incident. The final sentence seemed to linger in the air longer than it should have. Passengers held their breath. Phones captured the moment. Captain Hughes straightened. He was a man used to controlling the cockpit, not public reckoning in the cabin. Still, he nodded slowly. "Dr. Carter, I will forward these requests immediately. Our legal team and executive leadership are already reviewing the footage." Maya nodded once, a small but definitive motion. "Good. Then let me make something else clear." Her tone didn't sharpen, but it deepened, carrying weight like a stone dropped into still water. Sky Continental operates 14 aircraft leased directly from Orion Aero Systems. We are currently negotiating a contract for 20 more. That negotiation will be paused until this matter is resolved transparently. Gasps fluttered through the cabin. Passengers exchanged wide-eyed glances. Phones buzzed with frantic typing as streams pushed the revelation outward into the digital storm. Luis Alvarez's jaw dropped. He had studied aviation contracts in his coursework. But to hear a passenger wield that kind of leverage, real leverage, was almost unbelievable. He whispered, "She doesn't just fly the planes. She owns part of the sky." James Cooper chuckled low, shaking his head with admiration. "That's power right there. Calm, quiet, and prepared." Rachel's breath came shallow. Her knees trembled. She wanted to disappear, but every camera in the room ensured she couldn't. Maya wasn't finished. She retrieved her tablet from her bag and tapped it awake. The screen glowed with spreadsheets, agreements, timelines. With a few deliberate taps, she pulled up a file labeled Airfare Initiative. Her voice was steady. "This program has been in development for months, and now it will not wait." She turned the tablet slightly, enough for the captain and the officers to see. Bullet points filled the screen, clean and undeniable. "Mandatory unconscious bias training for all customer-facing employees," she said. "Passenger verification protocols that prioritize documentation over assumption. A 24-hour passenger advocacy hotline monitored by a neutral oversight board. Quarterly reporting of diversity metrics submitted directly to the FAA." Her words struck with the precision of policy, not anger. She wasn't just calling out a flight attendant. She was redesigning the culture of the skies. Rachel's stomach churned. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was bigger, much bigger. Luis Alvarez leaned forward, eyes wide. She's rewriting the rules." He whispered to no one in particular. Chloe Bennett clutched her Kindle tighter, her chest aching. She had come on this flight expecting nothing more than a cross-country trip. Instead, she was witnessing history written row by row. James Cooper's voice rumbled, "She's building something better, right in front of us. Most people would have just sued. She's fixing the system." Maya continued, each sentence deliberate. "This is not about punishing one employee. It is about dismantling a culture that allowed her to believe she would never be held accountable. I am not here for a settlement. I am here for change." Her words cracked something inside the cabin. For the first time, passengers didn't just watch. They began to nod, to murmur, to shift from passive witnesses to quiet supporters. Rachel lowered her eyes to the floor, unable to meet the stares pressing in from every direction. Evelyn Shaw wiped at the corner of her eye. "She's right," she whispered to her husband. "This isn't about her seat. It's about all of us, about the way we look at people before we know them." Robert exhaled sharply, his pride finally giving way. He didn't respond, but his silence was no longer defiant. It was remorseful. The captain's radio crackled softly. Ground control was demanding answers. Corporate executives were scrambling. PR teams were drafting statements in real time. The outside world was on fire. Inside the cabin, Maya's voice was the calm in the storm. "Passengers deserve more than service," she said. "They deserve dignity, and dignity is not negotiable." The silence afterward wasn't heavy this time. It was reverent. Phones captured her words, and within minutes they were headlines. "Doctor," "Carter calls for airline reform mid-flight," "Bias training," "Oversight," and "Accountability demands from the sky." Luis Alvarez felt his throat tighten. For the first time, he saw himself not just as a student, but as part of the future she was shaping. "She's changing aviation," he whispered. Chloe Bennett finally let the tears fall. Her silence earlier felt like a weight she might never fully shed. But now, she understood something deeper. Silence wasn't safety. It was surrender, and she promised herself she would not surrender again. Rachel sat frozen. Her phone dimmed in her lap. The career she once clung to was gone. The system she had assumed would protect her had collapsed, and the woman she tried to humiliate had turned humiliation into blueprint. Captain Hughes spoke at last, his voice low but resolute. "Doctor, Carter, your demands will be heard. I will ensure this." Maya gave a small nod, her eyes steady. "Ensure they are not just heard." "Captain, ensure they are implemented." Her words carried the kind of gravity that doesn't just end an incident, it begins a movement. And everyone in that cabin knew this flight would not be remembered for its turbulence or its destination. It would be remembered as the day dignity refused to move. The cabin settled into a silence that was no longer tense, but reflective. The kind of silence that follows a verdict. The hum of the engines vibrated softly beneath the floor, a reminder that the aircraft still had a destination, though for many passengers, the journey had already changed them. Doctor. Maya Carter sat unmoved in 2A, her presence commanding without force. She had spoken her truth, presented her proof, and laid out demands that shook the very structure of the airline. But outside, beyond the thin walls of the fuselage, the storm had already escaped containment. On Twitter, hashtags trended in a wave that eclipsed politics, sports, even celebrity gossip. #Quiet Power held the top spot. Videos clipped from Rachel Morgan's stream circulated with millions of views. One frame showed Rachel smirking at her phone. The next showed Maya's business card on the tray table. The contrast spoke louder than commentary. Cable news channels broke into programming with developing story banners. Commentators debated live. One anchor asked, "What does it say when a black woman has to show her business card and platinum credit card to be believed in first class?" Another replied, "It says the system is broken and she's showing us how to fix it." Inside the cabin, phones buzzed as passengers refreshed their feeds. Luis Alvarez stared at his screen, mouth slightly open. Aviation blogs were already posting Maya's keynote from a summit 2 months prior, her voice commanding an auditorium of engineers and executives. "That's her," he whispered. "That's the woman who redesigned the propulsion systems for next-gen fleets." James Cooper leaned back, arms crossed, a proud smile tugging his lips, and here they thought she didn't belong. Chloe Bennett scrolled too, her hands trembling. Headlines multiplied before her eyes: Sky Continental faces PR nightmare after CEO humiliated in first class, from prejudice to policy doctor, Carter's mid-air demands. Each article felt like a mirror reflecting her own silence back at her. She wanted to disappear. But instead, she whispered aloud, she turned humiliation into history. Evelyn Shaw adjusted her pearls nervously, then lowered her hand. "It's everywhere already," she muttered to her husband. "People know. Everyone knows." Robert's eyes remained fixed on the floor. His pride had carried him through decades of assuming he could measure someone's worth at a glance. But today, pride had met proof, and proof had won. Rachel Morgan sat stiff near the galley, her phone limp in her lap now. She didn't bother scrolling anymore. Every alert was another nail in the coffin of her career. She closed her eyes briefly, wishing for darkness. But every whisper, every headline, every sideways glance reminded her there was no hiding. The reckoning had arrived, and she was its unwilling messenger. Captain Hughes spoke quietly into his radio. Coordinating with ground control, the executives at Sky Continental headquarters were scrambling, their phones buzzing with investors demanding answers. He glanced at Maya, then at the silent cabin. His voice, when he returned, was respectful. "Doctor, Carter, corporate has acknowledged receipt of your demands. They are aware this incident has gone viral." Maya tilted her head, her voice steady. "Awareness is not action. Be sure they understand the difference." Passengers shifted again, her words striking deeper than the press of altitude in their ears. Then, something unexpected happened. The man in 1C, the one who had streamed the incident like it was sport, slowly stood, his phone still in his hand. He cleared his throat. His voice carried through the cabin, uncertain but sincere. "I want to apologize," he said. "I recorded you like you were a spectacle. I didn't stop to think. I didn't ask questions. I just assumed." He raised his phone slightly, showing the still active stream. "My video's out there now. But I'll post the truth too. The full truth. That you didn't shout. You didn't disrupt. You sat here calm while the rest of us decided who you were without knowing you at all." The cabin murmured softly, surprised by his admission. Maya looked at him briefly, then gave a single nod. Nothing more. It was enough. Chloe Bennett's throat tightened again. His courage was the spark she needed. She spoke louder this time, her voice trembling but clear. "I heard it too, from the beginning, the words she said to you, the way she shoved your boarding pass. I heard it, and I stayed silent. I didn't want to get involved, but silence is just another way of saying yes to a lie, and I regret that. I regret it deeply." Her confession cracked something in the cabin. Heads turned, shoulders shifted. Some passengers looked down, shame burning behind their eyes. Others nodded quietly, a silent chorus of recognition. James Cooper's voice followed, solid as oak. "Owning it matters. It's the only way change happens." Luis Alvarez, emboldened now, raised his phone slightly. His own live stream glowed on the screen, an audience of fellow students already watching. His voice steadied. She's teaching us all what dignity looks like under fire. And if we can't carry that lesson past this cabin, then what are we even doing? Maya allowed the silence to grow again, shaping it like clay. Then she spoke, her words deliberate, designed to pierce through shame and settle into memory. Change doesn't begin with punishment. It begins with recognition of the harm done, of the silence chosen, of the systems built to protect arrogance instead of dignity. She let the words breathe. Passengers listened, leaning in, absorbing. This moment is not about me, she continued. It's about the next time you see bias unfolding, the next time silence tempts you, the next time you choose between complicity and courage. Because silence is not neutral. Silence is permission. Her voice carried without rising. Every phone recorded. Every passenger felt the weight. Rachel closed her eyes, her shoulders trembling. She whispered, barely audible. I was wrong. Maya heard it, but she didn't respond. Not yet. Some lessons had to linger. The cabin had shifted. What began as whispers of judgment had become murmurs of accountability. What began as a performance for online validation had become a reckoning live-streamed to millions. And outside, the world was no longer just watching. It was choosing sides. Investors issued statements demanding corporate transparency. Civil rights groups trended hashtags, framing Maya's calm dignity as a blueprint for resistance. Aviation insiders debated how quickly the airline would settle and whether reforms would stick. The plane hadn't left the runway yet, but the story had already traveled farther than any aircraft could. Maya sat back in her seat, unshaken. She didn't need applause. She didn't need vindication. She needed change. And change had already taken flight. The cabin was no longer just a cabin. It had become something else entirely, a classroom, a courtroom, a mirror. Every passenger sat differently now. Some leaned forward as if trying to absorb more. Others sat back with eyes lowered, reflecting on their role in what had unfolded. Phones still glowed, but no one was recording for drama anymore. They were recording to remember. Doctor. Maya Carter's presence filled the space without force. She didn't need to command attention. Attention bent toward her naturally, as if the truth itself had chosen her as its vessel. She waited until the murmurs softened, until silence held the cabin once more. Then she spoke. You all came on this flight expecting a journey from New York to San Francisco. She began, her tone calm, steady, and precise. But life doesn't wait for destinations. Sometimes the journey itself demands that we look at who we are and who we choose to be. Her eyes moved across the rows, pausing deliberately on faces Chloe's, still flushed from her confession, Luis's, glowing faintly with new conviction, Evelyn's, heavy with regret, Rachel's, pale and rigid, clutching her phone like a lifeline that had already snapped. This is not about a seat, Maya continued. It never was. It is about the assumptions that define who we think belongs where. It is about the arrogance that replaces procedure with prejudice, and it is about the silence that gives bias permission to grow. A hush deeper than before spread through the cabin. Even Robert Shaw, who had resisted until now, lifted his eyes to meet hers. He didn't speak, but the crack in his defiance was visible. James Cooper let out a low hum of agreement. Preach, he muttered softly, though he knew she wasn't preaching. She was teaching. Maya leaned forward slightly. her voice dropping just enough to force passengers to lean in. Change doesn't begin with punishment. It begins with recognition, with choosing to see what we ignored yesterday, with refusing to let silence speak for us tomorrow. Luis Alvarez raised his phone, his voice steadier now. "My classmates are watching," he said. "They're commenting live. They're saying this is the most important lecture they've ever seen, and it's not even in a classroom." Maya's eyes softened. "Then let them learn this dignity is not earned by proving worth to doubters. Dignity is inherent, and systems that forget that truth must be rebuilt." Chloe Bennett wiped her cheeks. Tears she no longer tried to hide. "I won't be silent next time," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. Maya caught her eye. Next time is the only time that matters. The weight of that exchange rippled outward. Passengers shifted, hearts thudding with the recognition that next time would come for all of them, in different forms, at different moments. Captain Hughes, still standing at the front, listened intently. He had flown for 3 decades, seen storms, mechanical failures, panicked passengers, but never had he witnessed a moment like this. He spoke slowly, his voice tinged with something new. "Humility. Dr. Carter, you've turned this flight into something far greater than a route. You've turned it into a reckoning." Maya inclined her head slightly. "Reckoning is only useful if it leads to rebuilding." Rachel Morgan finally stirred, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to rebuild after this." Maya looked at her evenly. "You start by facing the truth of what you did, not by excusing it, not by minimizing it, by naming it." Rachel's lips trembled. "I judged you before I saw you. I dismissed you because of your skin. I humiliated you to protect myself, and I broadcast it because I thought I was untouchable." The cabin drew a collective breath. For once, Rachel's words weren't defensive. They were raw. They were heavy. Maya let the silence hold her confession. Then she nodded once. That is where rebuilding begins. Not with reputation, not with saving face, but with honesty. James Cooper's voice rumbled again. "Most people never even get there." "That's something." Louise whispered, "This is history." Evelyn Shaw reached for her husband's hand again. For the first time, Robert didn't resist. His jaw loosened, his gaze heavy with the weight of everything unspoken. Maya straightened in her seat. "This industry will not change because one woman demanded it. It will change because moments like this expose what lies beneath, because every passenger here will carry this story forward, into boardrooms, into classrooms, into conversations that would otherwise remain silent." Her words weren't lofty. They were grounded, practical, undeniable. That was what made them powerful. On Twitter, clips of her sentences. "Silence is not neutral. Silence is permission," were already flooding feeds. Activists quoted her, investors debated her, students memorized her. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere shifted again, not tense, not ashamed, but determined. Luis lifted his phone one more time, speaking to his live stream. "This isn't just about aviation. This is about everywhere bias lives, about what happens when silence covers it, and about what can happen when someone refuses to move." The comments exploded. "She's rewriting the narrative. This is bigger than one airline. I feel called out, and I needed it." Chloe finally spoke louder, her voice clear despite the tears. "I came on this flight thinking silence kept me safe, But I understand now it just kept injustice safe." Maya gave her a small smile. "And now you've broken it?" The cabin breathed differently now. The weight of reckoning had shifted into the energy of resolve. Captain Hughes placed a hand on the bulkhead, his voice solemn. "Doctor, Carter, your demands will not be ignored. I will ensure this airline not only answers for today, but rebuilds for tomorrow." Maya's reply was simple. "See that it does." Phones captured the moment. Streams carried it outward. And the world beyond the cabin grew louder, more insistent, more aware. Inside, however, something remarkable had happened. A flight once divided by whispers had become united by truth. Not comfortable truth, not easy truth, but necessary truth. Maya leaned back once more, her presence unshaken, her mission clear. She hadn't just defended her right to sit in 2A, she had defended the right of every underestimated traveler to be seen, respected, and treated with basic humanity. And that, more than anything, was the lesson the sky itself seemed to carry now. The engines roared softly beneath the cabin floor as the aircraft pushed back from the gate. Passengers leaned into their seats. But no one felt as they had when they first boarded. Something irreversible had happened in this enclosed space. Something that had shifted them from spectators to participants in a reckoning larger than themselves. Doctor. Maya Carter sat poised in 2A, her documents tucked away, her presence undisturbed. She had not demanded attention. Attention had insisted on her. She had not asked for power. Power had simply revealed itself through preparation and patience. And now, as the aircraft inched toward the runway, the lesson lingered in every row. Rachel Morgan sat stiff in her jump seat near the galley, her scarf wrinkled, her face pale. For the first time in her career, she had nothing to say. Every attempt at defense had collapsed into silence. Her confession still echoed in her own ears. "I judged you before I saw you. I dismissed you because of your skin." It wasn't an excuse, it was evidence. Evidence of the very culture Maya had demanded be dismantled. Captain Daniel Hughes checked his instruments, but his thoughts drifted to what had unfolded in his cabin. In 30 years of flying, he had weathered storms and emergencies. Yet none had tested him like this, not the mechanics of the plane, but the mechanics of humanity. He knew his role wasn't just to fly the aircraft anymore. It was to carry the weight of a demand that stretched beyond runways. James Cooper leaned back, arms crossed, a faint smile on his lips. He had seen arrogance crumble before in firehouses, but never so quietly, never so elegantly. "Quiet power," he murmured. "That's what changes the game." Luis Alvarez stared at his phone. The stream now ended, but the comments still flooded in. His fellow students had declared the flight the most important seminar of the year. His heart pounded with something he hadn't felt before: hope. Hope that someone like Maya Carter could carve space for voices like his. Chloe Bennett sat straighter than she had all flight. Her tears had dried, but her resolve had solidified. Silence had once felt like safety. Now, it felt like betrayal. She promised herself she would not repeat that mistake. Evelyn Shaw squeezed her husband's hand. Robert said nothing, but he didn't resist. His silence was no longer defiant, it was contemplative. For the first time, perhaps, he was listening. The cabin dimmed slightly as the plane lined up with the runway. The captain's voice came over the intercom, calm but carrying weight. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are cleared for departure. Please remain seated as we prepare for takeoff. But before the hum of acceleration filled the space, Maya's voice carried one last time. She hadn't planned to speak again, but sometimes truth insists. "I want to leave you all with one thought," she said softly, her tone measured, deliberate. Passengers turned toward her instinctively, silence falling once more. "The world will always test you," she continued. "It will doubt you, dismiss you, and try to shrink you into silence. But dignity is not something you beg for. It is something you carry, quietly, consistently, until the moment it is seen." Her gaze swept the cabin, touching each face in turn. Prepared power does not shout, it does not flinch, it simply waits for truth to catch up. The words settled like a blanket over the cabin. Chloe felt her chest tighten. Luis gripped his phone, committing every word to memory. James nodded slowly, murmuring, "Amen." Maya leaned back again, her voice gentle but resolute. Never mistake silence for weakness. Silence, when chosen with purpose, is strategy. And when strategy meets truth, it becomes the loudest form of justice. The engines surged, pressing passengers back into their seats as the plane thundered down the runway. But even above the roar, Maya's words lingered, echoing in their minds. As the aircraft lifted into the sky, passengers carried more than luggage. They carried reflection, regret, resolve. They carried the weight of what they had seen and the responsibility of what they would do next. Rachel closed her eyes, tears pricking at the edges. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring for her career, her reputation, her life. But she knew one thing with clarity she had never felt before: she could never again pretend ignorance was protection. Luis Alvarez opened a new note on his phone and began typing furiously quotes, observations, ideas sparked by Maya's composure. He didn't want to forget a single detail. He would share this with his classmates, his professors, anyone who would listen, because this was more than an incident. It was a blueprint. Chloe exhaled, her hands trembling slightly as she closed her Kindle. She had carried stories of other people's bravery in books. Now, she had lived one, and it had changed her. Evelyn Shaw whispered softly to her husband. She turned an insult into an instruction. "We can't unhear it now." Robert squeezed her hand once, his silence no longer stubborn but softened. The plane leveled off at cruising altitude. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Yet no one rushed to stand. No one hurried for overhead bins. The cabin remained hushed, as though every passenger knew they were part of something larger than a journey. Maya glanced out the window, the clouds stretching endlessly beyond. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, not triumphant, not vindicated, but steady. She hadn't raised her voice to be heard. She had raised the standard, and the world had caught up, and in that moment, 30,000 feet above the earth, she knew the truth: dignity had taken flight. And so, at cruising altitude, a flight became far more than a journey between two cities. It became a testament to what happens when dignity refuses to move. Doctor Maya Carter didn't just defend her seat, she defended the right of every underestimated traveler to be seen, respected, and treated with humanity. This was never just about one flight attendant or one misunderstanding. It was about all of us, the passengers who stayed silent, the systems that protect arrogance, and the voices that rise when the world tries to shrink them. It was about turning humiliation into blueprint and transforming bias into reform. Rachel Morgan's smirk crumbled into silence. Chloe Bennett found her courage after realizing her silence was complicity. Luis Alvarez streamed a lesson that inspired his entire generation. James Cooper reminded everyone that quiet power is louder than arrogance. And Evelyn Shaw, once quick to judge, admitted that bias only survives when people nod along. The question now is, what will you do the next time silence tempts you? Will you let injustice pass unnoticed? Or will you stand with quiet strength like Maya Carter did? If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe for more stories that expose, challenge, and inspire. Together, we raise the standard and let the world catch up.